I broke my DAW, and it was all my fault. Today, I want to talk about how I keep my studio up and running and stable and don't deal with crashes and issues and problems when I'm working here. I work in Pro Tools, and my machine is rock solid. I don't run into crashes and have problems with Pro Tools the way some people talk about having issues with Pro Tools. So I want to talk about how I do that a little bit and also give you some strategies that you can apply to whatever DAW you're using, because this isn't Pro Tools specific stuff. This is stuff that would work really for any DAW and in any studio. So first of all, let me tell you what happened. I upgraded Pro Tools, and I upgraded too soon. But it's my fault, and let me explain why. Whenever I'm going to upgrade my system, I always do some testing. I test the updates to make sure everything works fine and everything I've been doing is going to continue working fine. And in this case, I missed something. Something that's really important to me when I'm mixing is my Avid S1 control surface. I do a lot of mixing on it, and in particular, I do a lot of EQing with it. And in this particular case, when I open up Wave's EQ plugins, which I use a lot, in the new update for Pro Tools 2023.12, as of today, those knobs, they don't work anymore. Something got broken in the process. I don't know if Pro Tools did it. I don't know if it's a Yukon thing, but it doesn't really matter to me. The new features that are in really just about any update, rarely are they these kind of game-changing things these days that completely revolutionize the way you work. So I'm not dependent, generally, on updating my software. Right now, I do like keeping things as current as possible since I'm working in Dolby Atmos. There are things that are updating a little faster in that area when it comes to integration into DAWs, but I do have a working way that I can do everything. So updating isn't as important as it needs to be. So how do I handle updates typically? In general, on my machine, I have two system drives. I have my main system drive, and then I have a cloned drive that is an exact copy of my main system drive. That clone copy is always a clone of a working configuration. So over time, it usually will end up being, maybe 3 to sometimes 6 months old at the latest, but I try and keep it up to date, usually once a quarter, with whatever my working configuration is. And this drive serves two purposes for me. For starters, that system clone is a backup for me. If my main system dies, I can swap over to my cloned drive and I can just keep right on working. Piece of cake. The other thing I use that clone drive for, though, is testing. If there is a new DAW update or a software update, maybe a plugin I'm not entirely sure about, I'll hop over to my clone drive and test it on there. In this particular case, with the latest Pro Tools update, I went over and I tested a lot of things, and everything was working really good. And I even did a bunch of projects in this latest update. And then when I was getting ready to start a new music project, I noticed, hey, these EQs are not working the way they used to for me. I mean, the plugin worked fine. The software was stable for me. My method of working using my control surface, that wasn't going to work. And I spent way too much time trying to see if I could get it to work, clearing caches, preferences, reinstalling things, all kinds of stuff. I had enough downtime, thankfully, that I was able to do this, but none of that worked. And honestly, if I had just checked this like I should have in the first place, I just would have said, hey, this isn't ready for me to update to yet. So that's why I have that clone system drive. Some guys might be mad at the developer because software broke, from the update, it broke something. But you know what? For me, it's not worth it to get mad about it because everything was working. The new features in the new update, there's some nice things in there that I wish I had access to, like some of the new marker features, but it's not going to stop me from working. It's not going to stop me from delivering great results for my clients. So I'm not really mad about it. We've got to move on. We've got to deal with things professionally and move on. For me, I just downgraded my system. I rolled back to a working version. This brings up something else that's important for me. I keep a library of every installer I have ever used. Every plugin I use. I have Pro Tools versions going back to probably Pro Tools version 9 at least, maybe earlier. I keep all of that stuff backed up because if I ever need to roll back, like I did in this case, sometimes you can find that stuff online, but not always. For me, keeping a little archive, and I keep it locally and I keep it up in the cloud, it just means I can always get back to something working. And it took me about 15 minutes, but I got my system back up and running in the stable configuration I had it in. Another thing for me, my OS on my machine, I'm probably about 2 years behind right now on the operating system because the one I've got works. And if it works, I'm just not in a hurry to update as long as everything new that I want to put on it stays compatible. And right now, it is still compatible. It's always safer for me to keep everything configured as close to possible as I can to what it was. So that means updating my OS very rarely. I update my DAW a little more often, but again, when I do it, I always have a backup and I always do a bunch of testing to make sure everything's going to work. So from a technical standpoint, if you're wondering about cloning the drive, I use a piece of software called Carbon Copy Cloner. I clone my system drive. I also clone my work drive every single day with it so that it's another drive I keep a backup on hand at all times locally and do cloud backups of things as well. That's just the strategy that's been working for me. You can try it out for yourself or come up with one. I mean, I think at a minimum, you should have some kind of strategy. One of the things I've learned over the 25 years of my career is it's never a question of will something break. It's always a question of when will it break. Everything is going to fail at some point in time. It's just inevitable. So having some kind of strategy in place means I don't have to figure it out when it breaks. I can just go through my process, fix everything, move on, and keep working. Yeah, sometimes it's a little frustrating because it's not time I generally want to spend on things, but it's a lot easier to deal with when I have a plan in place. And in the case of this update this time, yeah, I'm bummed out that that feature broke, but it was my fault. I should have tested and should have found that it didn't work. And then I would have just stayed in the version where everything worked because that's what I rolled back to. And now I'm good to go and it's no big deal. So anyways, if you've got a strategy that works for you, I'd love to hear about it. Put it in the comments because I'm always looking for new ideas and I'm always tweaking my own strategies and process, and I might steal yours if I like it better. So leave a comment below if you got questions. Love to hear them. But thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.